Welcome to the Philly Prime podcast and Mob Talk Sit Down. We're not talking mob today, but we're talking racketeering in a big case that broke this week out of New Jersey. Joining me on the show today, a good pal of mine, Fred Tecce, former federal prosecutor, network news analyst on legal issues, aviation expert, pilot. What else do you do, Fred? You do everything.
Take out the garbage at the end of the night, puts everything in perspective. So thanks for having me, dude. Such a great opportunity and honor to be on with you. I've always admired your work over the years and was always honored to do TV and stuff with you. So thanks for having me.
Well, listen, I appreciate that. And it's a pretty big topic. I would say a political bombshell. And what we're talking about today is the indictment this week by a New Jersey grand jury announced by New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin on Monday of the indictment of George Norcross, who is a major league power broker in South Jersey, probably the biggest in South Jersey. He's a Democratic National Committee person at one point, former chairman of the Democratic Party in Camden County, serves on the board of trustees at several places. He's the executive director of his own insurance firm, Connor Strong Buckaloo. So big time guy's been in the political game here in South Jersey for years. I mean, decades. And always a force to be reckoned with by governors, state lawmakers, local folks, things like that. But this indictment, Fred, is a racketeering indictment and basically accuses him of leading, allegedly, a criminal enterprise to extort others through threats and fear of economic harm. And that's a quote right from the Attorney General, Matt Platkin. Fred, when you heard this Monday, your thoughts on this, on the indictment of George Norcross and 5 others?
Well, I mean, my initial thought, David, is that this is huge. I mean, this is not, this isn't indicting some guy for being a street corner mob boss. I mean, this George Norcross has been a pillar and, quite frankly, a mover and a shaker in Democratic politics in Southern New Jersey and, quite frankly, a lot of the country for decades. And so, the old adage about, if you're going to shoot the king, you better make sure you kill him. The first thought that came in my mind is that, well, there's the shot. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And listen, this got national attention. Politico, New York Times, Washington Post, all the New York papers, the Washington, D.C. papers, magazines across the country were writing about this. It was all over the place. And let's talk about probably the most interesting thing outside the charges, which we'll get to in a minute. George Norcross, his brother, and some of their lawyers decide to show up in Trenton at the news conference that Matt Platkin had Monday to announce the indictment. And he sat right in the front row, about 8 feet from Matt Platkin as he went through the press conference. Fred, your thoughts on that maneuver?
You can say what you want about Norcross, love him or hate him, but the guy's got, I'll use the anatomy that I can talk about. He's got a spine of steel. I mean, he's got a big. That takes guts. And the bottom line is that that's one of the reasons why, Dave. And I see this thing, and I know it's a big indictment, and we'll talk about all this other stuff. But I got news for you. 5 years or 3 years from now, if he's still where he is, that wouldn't surprise me, because this guy is tough. He's smart. I mean, that also takes smarts to go sit there right in front of the guy and say, bring it, baby.
Yeah. And resilience. Let me say that this guy knows he's been under investigation for quite some time by the state. Talked about it openly with Steve Keeley on Fox News back in November. I think the feds have looked at him once or twice before. He's never been charged. All kinds of stuff fly around about the guy all the time. And he always cream rises, comes to the top. He's never had a problem. He's never been charged. But this was a shot. 111 pages, as you talked about, 13 charges. Let me read a couple of them. Interference with commerce by threats or violence, theft by extortion, financial facilitation of criminal activity, misconduct, conspiracy, and the big one, racketeering, which, as you well know, Fred, from being a federal prosecutor, racketeering is the tool to which federal prosecutors love to beat you over the head with a hammer. Talk about that part of this.
So it's interesting. So years ago, when Congress passed the Racketeering, Influence, and Corruption Act, which people call RICO, now we're talking about on the federal level, but when they passed RICO, it was all done to go after the mob. And over the years, RICO has kind of become this kind of monster that's used. People use it in civil litigation between private litigants. The government uses it from a civil perspective. Most states in the union have passed their version of the RICO statute, and it's a racketeering. It is what it said, and it was a statute designed to get mobsters, to get people in. And the irony of it is that, and we'll see what happens in this case. But if you're going to act like a mobster, okay, you're going to try and shake people down, and that's the allegations. You're going to try and threaten people, then you're going to get charged with the mobster statute. It's just that simple. I mean, so there's been a lot of commentary and a lot of criticism over the years about the use of the RICO statutes, but again, we're a long way from having Mr. Norcross get convicted. But these are the types of crimes, these are the type of the allegations that this was designed to go after.
All right, let's make it crystal clear. There's no mention of the mob anywhere near this.
No, not even close.
Just a statute used to fight against the mob being used here to fight against politics, basically, what we're talking about.
The irony of it is that, and I'm sorry, but it was passed to go after the mob, but then it was used in countless other instances that did not involve the mob. And that was a lot of the criticism. Like, it was passed to go after something, and then it was never designed to be used against private citizens or anything else. It has been used like that. And you're absolutely right. There's no allegations of mob.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Critchley, who's one of the best lawyers I know, I actually saw him in court a couple of weeks back in Toms River, is in his 70s now, hasn't lost a half a mile an hour on his fastball. He is George Norcross's attorney. And if George Norcross didn't have enough fight in him, I could tell you that Mike Critchley still has a lot in his bag, and he has a lot of tools in there. And I promise this, if it goes to trial, will be a brawl. People are calling me all week saying this is going to be a slugfest. And it will. Talk about, Critchley, Marino's in this. A couple of other big lawyers are in this as well. These are big-time lawyers going to strap it on and go to fight with the state attorney general's office in court.
Right. You have big-time lawyers, guys who know what they're doing, guys who have been around the block once or twice. This ain't their first rodeo. And, as a lawyer, oftentimes you're straddled by or limited by your client's resources, your client's commitment. All right. Anybody who thinks that George Norcross doesn't have the backbone to take this all the way is sadly mistaken. And he has chosen lawyers who are, his lawyer is a guy he's not a plea maker. He's not he's not a deal maker. He is a dyed in the womb criminal defense trial lawyer. And this will be, you get your tickets now, because this will be like the Thriller in Manila. It's going to be in South Jersey. I don't know where it's going to be. And the government lawyer is no slouch. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, no, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that in a minute.
So you're going to see a real, a bloodbath.
Critchley relishes the opportunity to go to court and go to trial. And Norcross does. On his way out of the news conference, by the way, he tried to ask a question at the end, and Matt Platkin left the stage, by the way, and was also asked to leave at the beginning and refused, and sat in the first seat in the first row right in front of him. On his way out, he called the attorney general a coward and said, I want to go to trial in 2 weeks, and I want Matt Platkin himself to prosecute me and bring the state's case against me in state court. Pretty ballsy.
Tell you, David, I know it's a 111-page indictment. I know he's on tape saying some really crazy stuff, but he's a far, far way from getting convicted.
Yeah.
Really is. He's got a lot to talk about. His lawyers have a lot to talk about. Remember, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. They got, it's been, it's interesting. You say he's known that it's been coming for quite some time, and yet he's continued to live his life and do what he always does. So that's one of two things. That's just kind of unbridled hubris that of people who think they're above the law, or it's a guy who doesn't think he's done anything wrong and may know exactly where the lines are drawn and how to get right up next to him, but not step over him. That guy gets acquitted, right? Mm-hmm. So stick around.
Yeah, and listen, let's talk about this. It's 111 pages. Mm-hmm. It kind of weaves you through a scheme that they allege the Norcross enterprise, which is what they call this. You'll hear that a lot in mob cases, the enterprise, the LCN, whatever. They used Norcross enterprise to talk about this. And the scheme involved state tax credits. And the wheeling and dealing, apparently, that the state alleges went on in Camden waterfront properties by Norcross and others to maneuver themselves to either get properties along the waterfront and get the tax credits, or be partners with folks in properties along the waterfront and get tax credits. And some big name people. They're not named. They're named Developer One, this, that, and the other thing. Some of them are out there in the headlines now talking about it, but it'll come out in court. But basically what they're saying is that this was used to kind of get like $1 billion in state tax credits on properties along the waterfront. And we got a shot of the waterfront. This is one of the shots from the indictment itself right there. Some of those buildings right there near the Ben Franklin Bridge involving those properties along the waterfront, some of them, not all of them, are included in this indictment. And basically it accused him of trying to wrestle control of the waterfront in Camden, which is a pretty big charge.
That is a big charge. And, Camden over the years, I was born in Camden, right? I was born in Lady of Lord's Hospital in 1960. And I can remember, I've always kind of been rooting for Camden because I've always thought it was a wonderful waterfront. I remember younger years ago, I'd go watch the Camden River Sharks at the baseball stadium that was kind of right there by the Ben Franklin Bridge in your shot. Mm-hmm. And but you're talking about $1 billion in tax credits that were earmarked. It's interesting to me. I mean, it's almost like or is the government's position going to be that was the currency with which he traded $1 billion worth of tax credits that should have been going to help promote? And I'm sure you're going to hear this from Mr. Norcross, right? Look at the Camden Riverfront now. Look at it 15 years ago. Look at it 20 years ago. So you can
he's already said it.
What's that?
He's already said it.
Tell me, you can tell me all this stuff, but look.
No, and he said nobody wanted to come to Camden. Nobody wanted to invest in Camden. We got it done. That's going to be they're going to say, you hurt the people of Camden. He's going to say, I helped the people of Camden. I helped the city of Camden. That's what he's going to say. And the proof is in the pudding.
Correct.
You're right. This is a long way to go. Those kind of things. But you also mentioned earlier, there are some, I won't use the word incriminating, but there are some kind of scratch your chin kind of quotes in allegedly recorded conversations. Some of those tapes, I'm told, are kind of old, like 2012, 2013, and they've been kind of reinserted in this 111-page indictment. But I'll give you an example here, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit. He's talking allegedly to a developer, and he says something, and this is not taped, but the developer apparently tells state officials this, that I'm going to F you up like you've never been F'd up before. And he talks about he would never do business again in Camden. Now, when you hear comments like that, that kind of starts to make you want to scratch your head a little bit, like, why is he coming on so strong? And then the question is, what did he do to further those threats? And therein lies the crime. Am I right about that, Fred?
You just took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly right. You have the statements, and then the question is, what did he do with them? And then afterwards. And you know what? That's the language in the statement of a guy who sits in the front row and stares down the attorney general. Those are the, people don't like, people may be kind of offended by his language or offended by his tone or offended by what he did. And the government's going to want the jury to hear that and jump to the conclusion that somehow this guy got shaken down or got extorted, which is the charge. And so the question is, what did Norcross do? And that's why I think, we'll have to see the evidence. You talk about the fact that some of these tapes are back from 2012. That's a decade ago. But when you charge a conspiracy, what people don't understand is that as long a conspiracy or racketeering or any of these influences, let's just talk broadly conspiracy.
Sure.
The statute of limitations is 5 years, David, but the statute is 5 years from the last overt act taken in furtherance of the conspiracy. So the fact that this stuff helped, the government's position is that this is a conspiracy that dates back 10, 12, 14 years. And there was overt acts by Mr. Norcross or other the defendants within the 5-year statute of limitations that allows them to, one, bring the charge and then go all the way back and sweep up everything else.
Yeah. And in essence, I've actually had dinner with some folks last night, and that's what they were talking about. Like, is there a crime in here? People make kind of threatening comments all the time. They say things they probably shouldn't say. Now, the question and the burden on the government here is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that behind those threats came actions that either Mr. Norcross benefited from or his friends benefited from, because he does use comments like "this is for our friends" several times, that the state has talked about it in there. And here's another quote that, again, according to the indictment, is on tape. After a conversation with a developer that is tape recorded, we don't know if it's by the state, we don't know if it's by the feds, we don't know if it's by the developer. We just know there's a tape, and the line is from the developer, "Are you threatening me?" And the response from George Norcross allegedly is absolutely.
Hey. And so, but again, I could spend that two ways. If I'm his lawyer, I could come in and say I talked tough and told him I was threatening him because I wasn't actually really going to do it. There wasn't anything I could do to him. I mean, there was no way for me to actually extort him other than to scare him into doing and paying what I wanted him to do. And so that's the first thing. And then the other thing too is that, and this is again, this is in the mob case, but there's a lot of analogies. I mean, so if someone from the mob comes to your storefront and says, "Oh, this is a wonderful storefront. You know, it's you've done a nice job. I'd hate to see, you know, it'd be terrible if something were to happen." You know that you better pay them the money, or you know, I know you live over on Main Street. Your kids go to elementary school. You know, everybody can look at that and say, "Oh, he's just being nice. He's just being friendly. He's just inquiring about their family." You know, and other people tell you, "Oh, he's threatening to kill him." I mean, so it's, you know, the question is not, it's not just the words, how they're uttered, that you can't just listen to them in a vacuum. It's the context in which they were uttered. It was the context of the words in connection with everything else, what was actually being done, what was being held up in the way of permits, what was being done with the tax credits, where were they going. When I hear stories about major developers who pull out because they're scared to death that they're not going to get a fair shake, even in a litigation, in an ensuing litigation, you know, you can't ignore that. You can't discount that. And so it's going to be up for the government. We get back to what this trial is going to look like. I mean, they're going to have to come in and they're going to have to do a yeoman's task of building a case kind of brick by brick, you know, mortar by mortar, until they build a wall that's sufficient enough to get a conviction.
Two little snips also on tape calls. You can never trust this developer until he's got a bat over his head. And then in another thing saying, "We got to make him cry, uncle."
Yeah,
right. I mean, juries will gobble that up.
They will.
But the prosecution's burden here, and you know that Mr. Norcross will come right back at this, if these tapes have materials before those comments to put it in context, and after those comments are made to put it in context. That's an old trick from Eddie Jacobs in mob trials. Don't just play me the part prosecutors want you to hear. Let me play what happened before and what happened after. And sometimes the after was, "But we'd never do that, and we don't do crime, so we're not going to do that." But I'm just saying. I mean, you got to hear the whole context of the conversation.
You really do. You have to hear the whole context of the conversation. So, you know, we'll see how long this trial is. I mean, with an 111-page indictment, this trial is not going to be short. And it would behoove the government to get it on as quickly as possible. And I mean, in as short as time as possible. I mean, you have 6, 7, 8, 9 week trial. That'll end up, that's going to inure to the defense's benefit, in my opinion. But what's that?
No, I was also going to say, also kind of woven into this are 5 other defendants, including Phil Norcross, George's brother, his attorney, William Tambuzzi, the former mayor, city council person, state senator, mayor of Camden from 2010 to 2018, Dana Red, who is a CEO of a big operation in South Jersey. Also included here, that's Dana Red right there back when she was mayor. And kind of the indications here is they're all part of this Norcross enterprise and part of the racketeering conspiracy.
So, you know, we talk about how Mr. Norcross has the wherewithal and and kind of the intestinal fortitude to go to the distance. May not be true with all the other defendants. And so one of the things we do want to watch in this case, Dave, is if any one of these defendants decides to flip over and testify.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying they will. I don't know if they will. I mean, everybody has their own lawyer. That's part of the reason why you have your own lawyer, so they can counsel each defendant on what to do that's in their best interest.
Mm-hmm.
I have no evidence of any of this stuff, but you want to make sure that lawyers are independent. They're not getting paid by third parties, anything like that. And so all those things kind of go into a big racketeering type case like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this case, much more so than a lot of others, if one of those defendants or two of them, Mr. Norcross's brother, I would be amazed if he decides to flip and turn on his brother. But the woman who's a former mayor, she's got a lot to lose. I mean, who knows? I mean, so we'll see what happens. I mean, you talk about, as this case develops, if all five of them stay together and go to trial, that in itself would be highly significant. If they all stick together and none of them testify against one of the others, then I think all five of them have a firm belief that they're going to end up being acquitted, and that you don't ignore that.
You can see that big L-shaped table in the courtroom with the 6 defendants with their lawyers sitting next to them against the 2 prosecutors and their assistants kind of sitting behind them. I want to make note that the indictment does point out that there are unindicted co-conspirators in here. There are other associates and or operatives of the enterprise that are not identified here but are known to the grand jury. This was a state grand jury situation. So, there's all kind of potential for the victims in this case, the alleged victims in this case, the business people involved here, the developers. They could be brought in on a friendly basis as a witness for the government or under subpoena to testify. And Fred, as a former federal prosecutor, sometimes you got to bring people in who don't want to come in, and they come in kicking and screaming, but they get a subpoena and in they come.
I, as a federal prosecutor, I had indicted an airline, 2 FAA officials. I had a general counsel of a huge Fortune 100 company who had evidence that I needed. And we went to visit him and prep him for his thing. And he didn't want to come in. And I just looked at him and said, sir, this is not some civil litigation. Either you show up here or I will send 2 U.S. Marshals to escort you to the courthouse. So you decide which way you want to go. Yeah. And that's the way it works. I mean, either you show up or 2 New Jersey state troopers who are not guys with whom you want to mess, okay, are going to show up at your door, all right? And we don't know. You don't know. You talk about unindicted co-conspirators. You talk about people who testify in front of the grand jury. So all the grand jury testimony in the federal system, we call that Jenks material. Yep. All that stuff is going to ultimately be turned over to the defense. They're going to know what the case is about. These are smart lawyers. These are smart clients. They're going to do one of 2 things. I mean, they're either going to figure out a way to kind of weave their defense through all the evidence, or not.
Let's talk about the Attorney General's office here. You don't bring an indictment like this, of this size, this magnitude, this importance against an individual this powerful, unless you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. They did not enter into this lightly. And this is no game. This is serious courtroom warfare coming up here. Talk about that. If you're the AG and you're sitting in Matt Platkin's seat, you got to know, as the best you can know, I won't say 100%, the best you can know, that you have a real good shot to win this case because you're taking a major public shot here.
Right. So this case didn't get brought or published until he sat down with the actual deputy AG people who are going to do it. One of whom I think I heard him may have been a former AUSA who had been a former FBI agent. And
we're going to talk about him in a minute. Actually, go ahead.
So we'll get to him in a second. But you as the AG, I guarantee you, David, that this conversation took place. He sat those people down in his office and said, "Look, here's the deal. We don't do this unless the 3 of you can look at me. I know you can't promise a conviction, but I need to know, because we're all putting our reputations on the line. We're going after George Norcross. We may open ourselves up to, George Norcross is not a guy, if he wins, and turns out wasn't properly prosecuted, he ain't going to go quietly into the night. Okay.
No, sir.
And so, we're going to do this. Then I need to know from all of you. Okay. If any of you have any questions, any qualms, any misgivings, then now's the time to talk about it. Because otherwise, once we pull the pin out of this grenade, and I hate to use war analogies, but once we pull the pin out of this grenade, we're we're going forward.
Yeah, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Can't
Listen,
put-
I worked in the
can't
Attorney
back-
General's office. I sat with the Attorney General and the Division of Criminal Justice folks on many cases, so I could prepare press releases and do things like that. I was director of communications for them,
I forgot about that.
and
Yep.
they don't have a problem kind of pinning that indictment up on a wall and throwing darts at it. Like, how could they punch holes in this, and playing, the bad cop to the good cops who think they're prosecuting this guy. Like, what if they did this? And what if they did that? And what do we do when they do that? So I can't see him standing at that podium on Monday with George Norcross in the front row in the first seat staring him down, unless he was as sure as he could be that they could bring a solid case here. And if you look at that picture right there, that's Platkin at the podium. The white-haired gentleman to his left and our right is George Norcross from behind, shot by a photographer at the news conference. So you got to be damn sure you're going to bring it.
You do, you really do, and you would be smart to have a team of lawyers before you bring the indictment. A team of lawyers sit down with you and go back and forth and take your best shot. Tell them, take your best shot. They say your worst case when you're getting ready for light is the best case scenario. So I want to see you tear us to shreds, and if we can survive this, then we've got a shot here. And if we can't, then we can't. We can't take this. We can't do this.
In the Attorney General's press release, it talks about the individuals who will prosecute this case. I believe there's 4 attorneys. One of them is Michael Breslin. Michael Breslin joined the Attorney General's office almost 2 years ago. He's a deputy director of criminal justice. He's in the integrity unit, assigned to that for this case. He is the former head of Squad 1 at the FBI in Philadelphia. He ran the mob squad, as they called it, handed up a couple of very interesting indictments in the last 7 years he was there. He is a former federal prosecutor in New York and was assigned in New York to the Bonanno Crime Family Squad. Each of the 5 families in New York have a squad assigned to them by the FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, or any other strike force that might be working on it. Mike Breslin has been in his fair share of bare-knuckle courtroom situations. And given his experience here and his long career at the FBI and the fact that he's named in the press release as one of the people who's going to prosecute this case, I've seen his work. He's very good at what he does, and he's very serious and very straightforward. Reminds me a little bit of Fred Tecce, a little bit, but not with your humor, Fred.
I don't know. Those guys are the real thing, brother.
Yeah.
I mean, I sit up here in this big fancy office and live in fear that someone's going to walk in and say, "We figured you out. Get out." But anyway, we digress. Look, dude, that's the kind of guy
you need a tough prosecutor, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah,
to be the frontline guy.
I was, and there's. Let me tell you something. I left the U.S. Attorney's Office in '90s. Well, probably '98 by the end, but that's been 25 years. It was a different world being a federal prosecutor in those days. It was very, very different than it is today. And I don't want to get into it, but I mean, we would never listen to anybody. We never thought about anything else other than whether or not here's the statute, here's what someone did they break the law? And if they did, then our job was to advocate for the people zealously to the full extent of the law and the best of our abilities. And that's what this guy is. I mean, he's a zealous advocate for the government, for the people of the state of New Jersey, and they're damn lucky to have him. And so, he'll do a good job. I mean, this is not a case that you want somebody who's cutting their teeth on, of course.
Yeah. Interesting. Also in the indictment is discussed just kind of how far the Norcross enterprise, the tentacles went, to the point where it talked about some of the people involved here, not elected public officials sitting on any city council, state lawmaker, or anything like that, were actually involved in planning how the waterfront in Camden got developed, although they held no official position. There's some talk about them being involved in crafting the EOA Act, which was an Economic Development Act that dealt with tax credits, working on that in Trenton. Again, not public officials elected to any public office by the voters, but they had a hand in developing that, kind of stewarding it through the legislature to the governor's desk, and it gets put in place.
Right. And that can be really, really good, or that could be really bad. I mean, right, because they aren't elected and they don't answer to anybody. But it's interesting to me. I mean, if the American people knew how much of their lives were affected day in and day out by unelected, I don't want to call them bureaucrats, because people have used bureaucratic as a pejorative term.
Right.
But every part of your life, the Federal Trade Communication dictates what you hear in ads. The Federal Election Commission talks about what happens in elections. I mean, it's the Consumer Product Safety Commission looks at. I mean, so all of those are organizations that are run by unelected officials. And so in this instance, again, we can spin this two ways, right? You can look at the picture of the waterfront and you can say, well, these people were all kind of off here doing whatever, but look what they've done. It's not like
they made it happen.
It's not like all those people were there and $200 billion worth of the taxpayers' money has just kind of vaporized and nothing happened out there. So, it's one of the things that when I teach trial advocacy, I don't try cases like I used to, but I still teach trial advocacy. And I think one of the things that people need to remember, and I think it's very true in this case, every piece of information, every bit, every conversation, every word can be read in a couple of different ways. You go to a Chinese restaurant, you get a fortune cookie that says you're going away for a long time. Okay. If you're a positive, upbeat person, you're going to Tahiti with some redhead. Okay. If you're a negative person, you're going to Federal Correctional Institute in Ferreton, New Jersey for tax evasion. It's the same piece of information. Okay. And in this case, you're going to see a lot of pieces of evidence and a lot of information that one people can look at it and say one thing, and other people can look at it and say something completely different. And where the jury draws the line will dictate whether or not these people get convicted.
All right, let's wrap this up with, I always like to kind of check this out at the end of a big, huge indictment like this with 111 pages. Like the last 4 pages get into the Forfeiture Act. And that basically says that if they win this case, the government can go ask a judge to forfeit any proceeds, property, or other things of value that were garnered as a result of this racketeering conspiracy. And in Mr. Norcross's case, that's a lot. Yacht, helicopters. He lives in Palm Beach in Florida now. I mean, the financial end of it, not to mention the legal fees for this, which I'm going to guess would be a $10 million bill if this is a 3-month trial and a year-long prep to go to it I'm talking about all the defendants here. But that forfeiture thing kind of hangs out there in the back of your mind too, because if you lose, there's a very real possibility they're going to go after the proceeds.
Well, there is. And, it's interesting. Again, getting back to what we were talking about, when they passed all these Forfeiture Acts, what they envisioned is that people would be using guns or cars or airplanes to move narcotics or drugs and stuff like that. And the government would seize them as part of the thing. And they would seize the properties and stuff like that. Nowadays, I mean, that a lot of people, a lot smarter than I, have written a lot of articles, and there's a lot in the literature about how a lot of people believe that the asset forfeiture provisions of the government's, both state and federal government, is widely overly used and also abused. And so, again, if the government convicts these guys of a real crime, then it would be appropriate for them to seize the assets of that crime.
Okay. Put your prognosticator, look forward kind of genie hat on here. A case like this, 111 pages, probably box after box after box of tapes, evidence, documents, all those kind of things. Fred, how long does it take to prepare to go to trial on a case like this on the prosecution side and on the defense side? You've been involved in some voluminous trials like that. How long does it take, and when do you think you might see a trial in a case like this? It won't be in 2 weeks, as George Norcross said.
It won't be 2 weeks, as Mr. Norcross wants. If it was anybody other than George Norcross, I would say probably sometime in the first quarter of 2025. But I think both he and the defendants are going to be really pushing, because I think their perception, just listening to what they say and kind of reading between the lines, is, make the government prove their case now, because the longer it goes, the more evidence the government's going to collect, the more opportunities they're going to have to find stuff. So let's hold their feet to the fire and get going. So, given these defendants, I would not be surprised. Well, I mean, litigation, civil and criminal, move at a glacier's pace. But having said that, you could see a trial in December.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm assuming you see probably a 2-month trial, 6 to 8 weeks to try a case like this, maybe a little longer.
If the government takes 2 months to try this case, I think that's going to be bad for them. If I'm the government, I want to get this case down in 4 weeks at the most.
Yeah.
And if you ask me why, I have no legitimate reason other than my gut tells me you need to get the case on and get it off, or you're gonna there's just too much reasonable doubt.
Can you see some opening shots by the defense suppression motions on the tapes, trying to suppress those tapes so they don't come into evidence? Can you see things like that, legal jockeying beforehand? Do you want to get right to it?
These lawyers are very, very, very smart, and they're not going to file suppression motions unless they know they can win them. Because in the court of public opinions, that's part of what they're dealing with too. They're going to be, well, Mr. Norcross, if you didn't do anything wrong, why are you trying to suppress this evidence? So they'll take it. These lawyers are smart lawyers, and they'll take a good, close look at this. And I can tell you one thing too. In that conversation we were talking about in the AG's office, the AG was asking them, is any of this evidence subject to being suppressed? Are we going to lose any of this evidence? And that was a discussion that was had long before the indictment was returned. But I don't see Mr. Norcross or his lawyers filing motions just for the sake of filing motions. I think if they think they have a really good Fourth Amendment reason or Fifth Amendment reason to suppress these, then they'll file them. But if not, you know what? They'll be like, bring it. Let's go. Come on.
Okay. Fred Tecce, always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend.
Dude, pleasure's all mine.
Spirited conversation. You know, I love that. And I was looking forward to you being on the show, and you did not disappoint me. 35 minutes of some solid legal analysis of this. And I really do appreciate you coming on the show. I know you're a busy guy. And I'm sure you and I and some others will be talking about this on this very podcast again in the near future.
Maybe over a glass of wine or also on another podcast.
You want to do it over a glass of wine? I don't know if we can drink wine on a podcast. I'll have to ask and see what the deal is.
We can't eat spaghetti without getting spots on our shirt. So
all right. I appreciate that. But Fred, thank you for coming on, man. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you for your insights.
Be good. Talk to you.
All right. That's it for Philly Prime Podcast this week, folks. Thanks for listening, and tune in again next time. We'll see you then.